We are live, Dylan. We were not expecting to record today. We actually had plans to record tomorrow. Dylan and I were scheming up our recording topic for tomorrow, talking about kind of the Shams report about an active and aggressive offseason for the Knicks. It doesn't get more active and more aggressive than firing your head coach who got you to the Eastern, not that he got you there, but he was the head coach who you reached the Eastern Conference Finals with for the first time in 25 years with. Dylan, this was a bombshell. I don't think you and I were expecting it to happen so soon. First and foremost, how are you doing? What is your immediate reaction to Tom Thibodeau, head coach of the New York Knicks, being fired?
Yeah, was not expecting it, like you said. I mean, we weren't even planning to record today, as you already alluded to. We were getting ready to kind of just record about some offseason stuff tomorrow, but we're right here now because Tom Thibodeau just got fired, which I was not expecting at this time. I mean, I wouldn't say the decision to fire him is the most shocking thing, but I will say the timing of it is pretty shocking. I was not expecting it to happen just days after the Eastern Conference Finals had wrapped up. The NBA Finals hasn't even started yet, and it doesn't start for another 2 days, and the Knicks already fired him. So that tells me that they kind of had this planned out. They had kind of already said to themselves in the FO that they said, if they didn't get past the Pacers, they were going to move on. It seemed like they were pretty firm on that, and sure seems that way because they fired him really without hesitation. It's been less than a couple days now since the Knicks got eliminated. I'm sure a lot of those players just got back home and their head coach is gone. And, the immediate reaction to that, I think it needed to be done. I do. We had been saying now for a couple of weeks now up to this point that the Tom Thibodeau era had kind of ran its course a little bit. I understand a lot of people were defending Tibbs, and I had defended Tibbs for a lot of this year, but, he kind of lost me in Detroit. Detroit was kind of that series where I was like, okay, I don't know if this is the guy who can lead my team to success because the Knicks have so much talent, right? They have so many talented players, but I felt like their head coach was kind of holding them back a little bit. And the reason I say that, the way the schemes were ran on defense, the offensive creation with one ball handler, it just, I know you can blame Leon Rose for some of those roster problems, but at the same time, I feel like the head coach was not maximizing it. He wasn't using his bench a whole lot either. It wasn't like really, digging deep into his rotation until he kind of didn't have a choice. And by then it was too late. So I think a change was needed. I think the Thibodeau era ran its course. He did his part. He spent 5 seasons with the Knicks and he brought them back to relevancy, which was really important to the Knicks franchise. I mean, they were just an absolute dumpster fire throughout the entire 2010s and all the early 2000s as well. Thibodeau is easily the best head coach the Knicks have ever had in the 21st century. So with all that being said, I mean, a change was needed. It sucks for some fans because, appearances, we're ready to win a title, and I do think a change was needed. And we'll get into like who we think the next guy can be, pretty shortly. But overall, I think this had to be done. That's really what I got to say to start this.
Yeah, I have to fully concur that, the New York Knicks were not optimized. And look, the New York Knicks roster is not perfect. And the New York Knicks did not lose in the Eastern Conference Finals solely because of Tom Thibodeau. I think those are important distinctions that we make. Anytime we talk about Tibbs, when we talk about the coaching situation, we talk about the Eastern Conference Finals. I just want to shout out Darren Hood saying, salute everyone. Darren, hope you're doing well, my man. Appreciate you stopping by. But I personally cannot view Tom Thibodeau as a guy who is going to get us to the NBA Finals. He's not. There are a lot of flaws in his coaching approach this season that I just think were too much for a organization trying to win the NBA Finals for them to overcome. You have a coach who did not play your bench very much in the regular season. And look, I wasn't a minutes police guy in the sense that like, they're going to kill these starters. I actually thought that argument was stupid. I thought for a while, like the minutes police thing was pretty dumb. But I think the one aspect of it that people don't, think about enough is, and I didn't think about enough at the time until the postseason came around, was a lot of these guys coming off the bench were very inexperienced. The guys who got the most run off the bench, Miles McBride, makes sense. Precious Achiuwa got some of the most run out of any guy on that bench. And let's be honest, Precious Achiuwa was a guy where I think we definitely didn't want to see him in the playoff rotation. We didn't see Shamet a lot. We didn't see DeLon Wright a lot. And yet these guys had to step up and perform in the postseason. Thankfully, they did. Thankfully, they did provide competitive NBA minutes. But, I got to go to the chat here. You see Mr. Magic. It's not his fault you didn't have any depth to work with. Depth was not why the New York Knicks lost in the postseason, in my opinion. I know that depth is something you need to work on, but it's not the primary reason. And the guys that they had coming off the bench overperformed. They actually played above what I think their expected value was. You don't expect Shamet to be a knockdown three-point shooter. You don't expect DeLon Wright to be a lockdown defensive player, but that's what they were. And it makes you wonder, why weren't these guys utilized more during the regular season, number one? And number two, why did the head coach only go to these guys in the most critical moments in the season? Why couldn't they be used when there are various injuries? Dylan referenced the stretch where Jalen Brunson goes down. DeLon Wright, inserted into the rotation, provides productive minutes to the New York Knicks. Why wasn't that the catalyst for more playing time? Those are the kinds of questions that they likely asked Tom Thibodeau, and the kind of questions that I think led to Leon Rose going from, where we were when Fred Katz dropped that article with The Athletic, where they were talking about Leon Rose backing Tibbs, to not having to making the decision to fire him. Because based on the Shams report, it was not James Dolan coming down and saying, you have to fire Tibbs. Leon Rose was in on this. He was for this. He went through his evaluations and he concluded that the head coach had to be fired. And the other big criticism that I think you can go to is, again, the starting lineup. Dylan, how many games did we play with that starting line? It took 96 games. 96. How many did it take for him to make a change? 96. Dylan, I don't know if I'm crazy here. Right. Too many, right? Yeah, no, I agree. Too many. Way too many. And I guess my final point, I'll pass it off to you like this. You cannot, like Leon Rose has made it clear, you're either good enough to win a title with or you're not. RJ Barrett was, a highly debated player. It was questionable whether you could win with him on that contract as your number three or your two. Your number three. That was who he was. He was your number three. He traded him for OG Anunoby because he felt OG Anunoby, including trading Emmanuel Quickly, by the way, which was a big deal at the time. He didn't believe that Emmanuel Quickly would be worth the contract he was going to get for that role that he had off the bench. And he believed that OG Anunoby would be worth it and that paying him would be worth it. He made the tough decision to go out and trade for Karl-Anthony Towns, not feeling the Randall contract would be worth it and believing that Dante DiVincenzo was maxed out in terms of his value. Again, Tom Thibodeau, he wasn't good enough. That's the conclusion Leon Rose reached. And whenever Leon Rose reaches that conclusion, you got to go. And I think that's the right way to look at it. What do you think, Dylan?
Yeah, it's that simple. I just don't think the Knicks were ever going to take that next step with Tom Thibodeau. And it sounds cliche to say because we just made the Eastern Conference Finals and we technically did take a step. But, we should have been able to beat the Indiana Pacers, okay? And credit to them. They're a good team. And they played well. They played us hard. But the Knicks have more talent. You really think the Knicks should have been able to beat them if they were able to beat the Boston Celtics? And that's kind of where it is for me. And it's not even just really about who you lost to. It's just the same problems that were happening with the Knicks all season long kept happening in the playoffs. The defense was an issue all year. No changes to that were made really at all. If anything, it only got worse. Guarding the three-pointers and even protecting the paint was an issue. The offense was very rigid at times. One guy was running the entire offense, Jalen Brunson, 9 times out of 10. And obviously you want Jalen Brunson taking a lot of your shots, but you also want to get your other guys involved. And I felt like that wasn't happening enough. Karl-Anthony Towns, I felt like was not getting enough three-point looks. I feel like he wasn't getting enough plays drawn up for him. I feel like Mikal Bridges especially was not getting enough plays drawn up for him. Oftentimes he was just sat in the corner, expected to just spot up. You know what I mean? So really, I think that while I don't think it was 100% Tom Thibodeau's fault why the Knicks ended up falling out the way they did, I think he played a big part in it. And I think and if you say otherwise, I feel like you're kind of lying to yourself a little bit that if he played absolutely no part in the Knicks struggling. I understand if you think the players deserved a little more blame, that's fair. But I think Thibodeau was definitely a big part of why they ended up falling out like this. I really do. And, I think he was a really good coach. I do. I don't even think he was like a bad coach. I just don't think he is the guy that could have taken us to where we want to be, which is an NBA title. I don't think at any point we were ever going to be the best team in the league with Tom Thibodeau as a head coach. We might have been a very good team. This year, you could say we were a top 5 team and probably the third best team, if you will, because, we made the Eastern Conference Finals. But at the same time, could we ever really sit there and confidently say, yeah, we can win the title this year? I think a lot of people had us losing to OKC if we were going to make the finals. If anything, I see a lot of people saying we probably would have gotten swept. And you know what? I'd have to agree. OKC is a different animal. OKC is coached well. Those guys play hard. They actually defend, something the Knicks do not do. So, that's really where it comes down to. And not for nothing, too. This isn't like this was like year 2 of Tom Thibodeau. If this was like the second year of him and then they fired him in this situation, yeah, that'd be weird. This was year 5. Okay, this was his 5th year with the team. And yes, they took minimal steps forward each year, but I felt like it was never going to get past this point with him. I don't. Especially if you kept this exact same roster too, or 90% of this roster. I don't think it was ever going to be that step forward. I don't think we were ever going to eclipse an Eastern Conference Finals appearance. We might have ended up like, what's a team that always fizzled out in the conference finals? Like the Clippers or something? One of those types of teams that always made it to the playoffs and you felt like they could always win a title, but they just could never do it. You know what I mean? Like, it's one of those things. Maybe the Clippers aren't even the best comparison. I'm just throwing a team out there because it's off the top of my head. But either way, I just don't think the Knicks were ever getting there with Thibodeau, and I think this is the right move. Now, who are they going to get to replace him? There's a bunch of different candidates out there. I know everybody has been saying Michael Malone, which, obviously he'd be the top candidate because, he won an NBA champion and he was just, coaching a playoff team in the Denver Nuggets. So obviously he probably would be number 1 on the wish list, but who knows? What if the Knicks don't like him like that? What if they want to go for a bit of a younger voice, a guy who could kind of resonate with the players a little more? Those are kind of things that we're going to have to figure out over these next coming weeks as they, look for a new coach. Because I would like to highly assume that they find a new coach before the draft. I would like to think that, if they fired Thibodeau this quickly, they probably have the intention of having a different voice ready before the draft comes along. So we'll see what happens with that. But all in all, I mean, I really don't know where they go from here, but I do think that this was the right move for them. I know this move could easily backfire in the long term, but if I was the one making the decisions, I would have done this too. That's really what I got to say about it.
I fully agree. This is exactly, again, this is just, I don't think we should sit here and pretend like, oh, well, because this was wrong with the Knicks roster and that was wrong with the Knicks roster. Yeah, the Knicks roster wasn't perfect. The Pacers roster isn't perfect. People go, well, how do you win with Jalen Brunson and Cat as your defensive duo? And granted, that is a flawed defensive duo. Don't get me wrong. The Indiana Pacers had the same defensive rating as the New York Knicks. It's not like the Pacers are some dominant defensive team. They beat you. They beat you. That's what they did. They beat you. And I don't think anyone walked into the season going, the Indiana Pacers have more talent on their roster than the New York Knicks. Don't think that's what the conclusion was. Would also like to say, again, we talk about bench usage. One team strolled to the postseason with their bench. They were 10-11 deep. They had their guys. They were all prepared. They all were in their rotations. They knew how to play with various players on the roster. The Pacers and Rick Carlisle, they were prepared. They were ready. They had all of their offensive plays tried and tested throughout the regular season. The Knicks were doing stuff they didn't do all year in the postseason. Starting Mitch, double big lineups, going 5 out. Et cetera, et cetera. They didn't do these things in the regular season. They barely tried McBride with subbing in McBride for Hart with the other 5. And I'm not even saying as a starting lineup, but as a lineup you threw out there during an NBA game. They didn't throw out the double big lineup very much in the regular season. When you're trying stuff that you haven't done all regular season, even when you were struggling, that's desperation. That's what desperation is. It's, hey, I'm doing this because it's nothing else is working. That's desperation, folks. And that's the kind of desperation I can't really get behind if I am a fan of an NBA team. And I definitely can't get behind that as a Knicks fan. I just can't. I simply cannot. Now, for Malone, I'm not sure I want him. I'm not sure where I'm at with Malone. I think the issue I have is that the Nuggets moved on from him, and it didn't seem like he and the GM got along very well. I do question whether that would work in New York, but I do trust Leon Rose and his staff to find someone. They're a very analytical organization. They're a very forward-thinking organization. They're an organization with an eye on the modern game. I believe they will bring in someone who reflects those values, and I think they'll definitely do it with their players in mind in terms of players who, in terms of making sure they bring in a coach who their players can click with. So, I trust the Knicks during this process. They hired Tom Thibodeau. Tom Thibodeau's a very good hire for what you were trying to do. That's a fact, in my opinion. I don't think you can doubt that. And again, this just opens the door for the New York Yankees, the New York Knicks, to go out and just it's just nice to know that they're taking a step forward that they need to. And I got to give credit to James Dolan. The guy is cutting Tibbs after giving him a $30 million extension. He is putting a lot of money in this team. He is investing in what he believes is a winning product. And credit to Leon Rose, he's gotten that trust. Again, this is something that when you go back a decade, will the New York Knicks fire a head coach that an extension is just kicking in for? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. No shot. Not a chance in hell. Dolan has trusted his front office to he's basically just the wallet for his front office. He signs all the checks. That's a step forward from where we were at a decade ago. And I'm not saying, I'm not trying to, do this. James Dolan's a saint, but it is an important step for the New York Knicks to have taken. And yeah, I mean, Dylan, are there any other candidates you're thinking of? I know Johnny Bryant's kind of thrown out there. What do you think about Johnny Bryant? Because I know he's a popular name. He's going to be one in this cycle.
Yeah, and Johnny Bryant was a Knicks assistant at one point, so there's that little homegrown tie right there. Most of the players are familiar with him, or some of them at least. And I think he'd be someone that they're definitely going to look after, especially because, like I said, he's already had ties with the organization, and other teams have already wanted him to be a head coach. He's already gotten a lot of interviews from other teams in years past, so I definitely think he's going to be up at the top of that list as well. I think he's going to be one of the main candidates, alongside, of course, guys like Michael Malone, or I've been even seeing people say go after like Dan Hurley, but please no, don't go after Dan Hurley. Please don't do that. That's someone I really do not want. But aside from that, looking at guys like that, it's just there's going to be an interesting search, because there could easily be someone else that we aren't even thinking of, that the Knicks have their eyes locked on right now, and they really are confident that he could be the person to lead the team. So we'll find out what happens with that. But overall, I mean, with Tom Thibodeau and stuff like that, for a lot of those players, it's going to sting that he's gone, because, it seemed like a lot of those guys like Tibbs a lot. I mean, we just heard Jalen Brunson just 2 days ago defend Tibbs to the core after they got eliminated. They asked him if he thinks that if Thibodeau's the right guy, and he adamantly said yes. And he walked out of the presser because he was upset that question was even brought up to him, because he thought it was ridiculous. So, knowing how those players felt about Thibodeau, yeah, it's going to stink for those guys. But a lot of those guys need to also realize that these decisions are made business-wise and with the thought of for the betterment of the team. And I personally think that this will be better for the team long term. I really firmly believe that. I think the Knicks can actually, kind of find a new ceiling now, because I honestly think that they had kind of hit their ceiling with Tom Thibodeau. Like I had been saying before, I don't think they were ever going to reach that next step with him. I just don't. As much as I would have loved to hope and pray that they could have, and, they were very close to doing that this year, but that didn't happen. And you have a window right now of about 2, 3, 4 years of, being contenders. You got to take advantage of that. You can't just settle and hope that something that hasn't been working fixes itself. You can't do that. You have to operate with a little more urgency this time around and really go after it. And I think the Knicks did the right thing. Credit, as you said, credit to the front office people. James Dolan and Leon Rose, credit to those guys, because it didn't really seem like they were willing to give up Tibbs like that. It seemed like they were very much like confident that he was going to be the guy, and that they weren't ready to move on from him. No, they cut bait. They stopped it before it could have possibly gotten worse, or anything else could have started. It brings me back to even some of the things during the season. It just felt like there was like some weird disconnect between Thibodeau and even some of the players. I mean, the bench guys didn't play a whole lot this year, so I'm sure those guys felt some type of way. Mikal Bridges, even at one point in the year back in March, he questioned publicly Tom Thibodeau's coaching strategy with the minutes. He basically outed him, saying like, maybe the bench should play a little more and the starters can get a little more rest. He wasn't trying to be like, oh, Tibbs' minutes suck, but he was essentially in a way saying that, like, maybe the minutes need to be adjusted. And it seemed like Bridges also, was kind of one of those guys that really didn't seem like he was like a big Tibbs guy. I don't know what it was, but even like the layup line suggestions, and even like, the intensity that he would play with on the court, just like the way he would be animated and stuff, it just felt like that there was something off between like him and like, the higher ups. It just felt like that there wasn't exactly something there. Maybe this will be better for him. I think out of all players, this is going to impact Mikal Bridges the most, because now he might get involved a lot more in the offense. Now he might, play a bigger role on defense. He might be more determined to do that. He might be actually like confident again. I feel like under Thibodeau, he didn't play with the same confidence. That's kind of why we saw him kind of really struggle this year. It felt like he wasn't exactly like there all the way. I mean, we even saw sometimes this year Tibbs benched him down the stretch of some games, albeit justifiable. I mean, he wasn't playing well, but when you don't have confidence already as it is because of the way your head coach is operating, and then that happens, yeah, it's going to wreck you. You know what I mean? And Mikal Bridges is a veteran, so I know some people might say like, oh, but he's been around for a while. He should know how to handle that. I mean, it still takes a toll on a player. They want to win. You know what I mean? These players don't show up to work for no reason. They come here because they want to win games. And when they're not winning games, or even if you are winning games, but you feel like it's a struggle to win games, yeah, it can get really frustrating. And I felt like throughout this year, there were a lot of games where, the Knicks could have destroyed their opponent, but they settled and ended up making it a much harder fight on themselves than they needed to be. I mean, even in the Detroit series, credit to Detroit, they played really hard, but at the same time, you feel like the Knicks should have smacked them around in 5. You really do. And really, they were one bad Jalen Brunson stretch away from having to play 7 games against them. 7 games against the Pistons, a team who hadn't been there in years, and a team who had won 14 games the year before. Obviously they're a different team than that 14-win team, but you guys get my point. You know what I mean? So overall, like I said, I don't want to just ramble on too much, but overall, it's still a stunning move, but it was the right move to be done. It had to happen.
Yeah, and I have to say it right now. I see a lot of people saying that Tom Thibodeau shouldn't have been fired because it's the first the Knicks gone in the playoffs in 25 years, or that the Knicks shouldn't have fired Tibbs because, well, look at the roster. What was he supposed to do? I can't possibly, if you look at all the quote unquote controversial firings. Oh, this guy got fired. How did that happen? Last year, Monty Williams. How can you fire Monty Williams? It's not his fault. See, look what he's working with. Look at what he's working with. He's working with trash. 1 year later, they're in the playoffs. Look at Dwayne Casey. They fired Dwayne Casey, the Raptors. What did they do a year later? I think they won the finals, right? They won the finals. Dwayne Casey, coach of the year. Raptors are always going on playoff runs. They didn't get to the finals. They got to the ECF. They had gotten to the second round. Honestly, you could argue losing to LeBron every year is really not a bad thing. That you're just facing LeBron James. That is just a guy you cannot beat. Still fired him. Right call. Ended up being the right call. Can you point out a time where firing the head coach, firing a head coach with years of experience that had not won a title, had been this god-awful decision that the team never came back from? Can't really think of one in recent memory. I know Budenholzer,
No.
People can argue that firing Budenholzer was the wrong thing to do. He won a title, number one. And number two, he just got fired by the Suns. I wouldn't consider Budenholzer the guy that the Bucks let get away, I would consider him the guy who got fired and was replaced eventually by Doc Rivers. That's a Doc Rivers thing, not a Mike Budenholzer thing. Yeah, I personally cannot sit here and explain. I really can't explain how you could watch the New York Knicks this year and not even and think that Tom Thibodeau was coaching brilliantly in the postseason. He got outcoached. He was terrible. Terrible in the postseason. Awful. Has to do better. Have to do better. Have to. HAVE space TO. Have to. Have to. It's a must. I can't. I'm sorry. The standard for excellence when you're trying to win the NBA Finals is not, well, we got to the Eastern Conference Finals. You know who's gone to the Eastern Conference Finals? I'm going to give you a list of teams who've gone to the Conference Finals in recent years. And you tell me if this is a standard of, well, this is what the Lakers, this is what consistent contenders do every single year. Pacers have been there twice, and I'm not discrediting the Pacers, of course. But I would like to believe that the Indiana Pacers are not considered, a top 5 organization in the NBA in terms of consistent success over the last decade. Wouldn't consider the Clippers a top 5 organization in that regard either. I know they've had years where they've been competitive, and they've had contender years. They've been there. Suns have been there. Mavs have been there. Nuggets have been there. Lakers have been there. Celtics, Heat, Cavs with LeBron. List goes on and on. A lot of teams have been there. In fact, I think it's only you, the 76ers, the Hornets, the Pelicans, anyone else that hadn't been there in 20 years that I can't think of off the top of my head.
Well, before last year, Minnesota. So
right,
before last year.
Minnesota. So everyone gets there. Everyone basically has gotten there. 90%, 80% of the league has gotten there. What is this? Why are we treating the Eastern Conference Finals like it's when you win a finals, that's when you separate yourself from the pack. When you win a title. Well, go ahead.
And I want to elaborate on the whole Eastern Conference Finals thing because I said this too, that making it there was not going to guarantee his job. I tried to tell people that, and I'm not trying to be like, oh, I told you so. No, I'm not always right about everything. I'll admit that, but I did try to say that making the Eastern Conference Finals alone does not guarantee your job is safe. I don't care that it was the first time in 25 years that you did it. No, it does not guarantee your job is safe. Anything could have happened. And you know what? 2 weeks later, not even 2 weeks later, 2 days after they get eliminated, he's gone. 2 days. I mean, it's again, I'm not trying to prove myself right of anything, but I did try to say it does not really matter just that you got there. You have to show that you belong there. And honestly, in this series, they didn't seem like they belonged there. They gave up game 1 the way they did, and then they kind of just fell flat on their face. I mean, yeah, they had a cool, inspiring comeback win in game 3. And yeah, they had the nice blowout win in game 5. But the series was wrapped up when you lost the first 2 games at home. And when you lose those 2 games at home, I mean, what can you really say more about that? Maybe you can look at, the players and be like, oh, the players are underperforming. But the thing is, the Knicks had lineups that were working. They had lineups that worked. If they had no lineups that worked, whatever. At that point, you blame the players on the court. Yeah. But they had lineups that worked. And Tom Thibodeau was very, very strict on using the same starting 5 for as long as he did. And in closing situations, despite the numbers telling you that was a much worse 5-man group than any of their other lineups. And when that's the case, I blame the coach. Because then at that point he's not maximizing the use of his roster. He's not utilizing them properly. He's not using them to their strength.
Yeah. Again, I mean, dude, I don't get you can win games in spite of your head coach. You can do that. You can win games in spite of your head coach. You can do that. That is completely possible. And again, I hate to drum this up again. Other teams who have been to the conference finals: Portland Trail Blazers, Atlanta Hawks in the last 10 years. They've both been there. Are they? I mean, are we going to start? We're going to start going. We're going to start turning up the Atlanta Hawks, or they fired their head coach briefly after that. Blazers had a whole Blazers rebuilt after that. Did the Utah Jazz? Did they get there recently? Have they gotten there recently?
Did Utah Jazz? No.
Yeah, the Jazz. No. They haven't got there recently. I know they've been to the playoffs frequently. They were a 1 seed once. I'm wrong. They were a 1 seed and they flamed out.
They flamed out every year.
Okay. So again, I'm just pointing out though that getting there does not mean you had a failure of a year, but you can get there and still go, man, we kind of need we could do better. We could be better, right? That's all it is, and that's honest and good organizational process. If you are an organization, if you're a company, if you're a team, whatever it is, and you are just satisfied with being good enough, you're not going to win. Not going to win a lot. I'm not happy to be here. I don't want to be happy to be here my whole life. I want to be happy. It was cool to be happy to make the playoffs. I'm not going to feel Dylan, are you going to celebrate making the playoffs next year if they do it? Because I'm not.
No.
The standard's higher than that.
I should expect to get there, just like how this year I said I expected to make the Eastern Conference Finals.
Right. And when we got there, the expectation became we should go to the NBA Finals, and we didn't. So in that moment, again, I'm not saying the season was a failure, but in that moment, that series was a failure. And you have to hold people accountable. And again, if the Knicks don't make any alterations to the roster, they don't add any depth, they don't trade for anyone, they don't make any change. They run out literally the same roster as last postseason, which won't happen. But if they did that, sure, then you can say Tom Thibodeau was a scapegoat. They only fired Tom Thibodeau because they thought he was the problem. They blamed everything on him. But we know that's not going to happen. Even if they don't make a massive move, I'm not saying Kevin Durant's going to be a New York Knick, but I'm sure they're going to do things to tweak the depth. I'm sure they might do things to tweak the lineup. And I'm also sure that they're going to run different offensive and defensive sets. And I think that at the end of the day, I'm very grateful that Tom Thibodeau was the coach of the New York Knicks during the stretch in which he was the coach of the New York Knicks. I'm very thankful for that. And had he not been the head coach of the New York Knicks and someone else was, I'm not sure we would be where we're at today. But I also know for a fact, that Tibbs would get outcoached by the Oklahoma City Thunder and their coaching staff. Can't pronounce the head coach's name. I wasn't going to try it. I'm going to be honest. I know that Joe Mazzulla lost to Tom Thibodeau in their lone playoff matchup, but I don't believe that was a coaching discrepancy. I don't. I think that was a execution discrepancy. I think the Celtics played like crap, and the Knicks got great. Jalen Brunson, incredible playoff riser. Things like that is why they won. I don't think the Knicks would outcoach even like a Kenny Atkinson-led Cavs team. You know, in their matchups, it looked like the Cavs were just a better oiled machine, and Rick Carlisle was running laps around Thibodeau. So again, when we talk about outcoaching, having a coaching discrepancy, it felt like we were at a coaching disadvantage against some of the best in the NBA. That's how I felt.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree. We were definitely at a coaching disadvantage. You know, I felt like in the Eastern Conference Finals, especially, he was getting outcoached. I mean, pretty obviously too. You know, the Pacers ran obviously the Pacers have some, you know, deeper talent, but they, you know, ran a deeper rotation, and it ended up, you know, hurting the Knicks because they were, you know, fully rested and energized, and the Knicks, meanwhile, those guys would get tired. They played a lot of minutes, but also I'm not even like being minutes policey here. I'm just saying, you know, they played a lot of minutes and all this stuff and didn't really utilize the bench. And then when you expected the bench to come in and make an impact, they at times they did make an impact, but at times they didn't because you didn't use these lineups throughout the year, so they have no clue how to play with each other. You know what I mean? You did practice all the time together and whatnot, but at the same time, that doesn't matter. You got to play on the court and you got to play in games together. And Tom Thibodeau didn't exactly mix and match his lineups to see what worked. He didn't. And by the time he started doing that, it was too late. It felt like at that point he was coaching for his job. And, you know, I've seen a lot of people say, oh, he should have kept his job after he beat the Celtics. Well, how do we know that them beating the Celtics was less of a product of Joe Mazzulla just being a bad coach in that series compared to Tom Thibodeau being good? How do we know that? You know what I mean? Like, we can't just immediately say, like, oh, Tibbs is the reason why they beat Boston. Tibbs coached well against Boston. I can give him that. But, again, they're facing a coach that I think a lot of people would argue was worse than him. You know what I mean? So, at the end of the day, I definitely think they were disadvantaged. I think what the Knicks have done now by moving on from him, you're setting yourself up to, you know, take the next step. And that's really what's key.
Yeah, and I think I wanted to pull up this right here because I actually think this sums up my thoughts on Mike Malone well. Yeah, I thought that Mike Malone was a very flawed coach with the Nuggets, and I thought he had to go as well. And so I personally think I'm out on Mike Malone personally. And I feel like you'd run into similar issues as you had with Tibbs. Hopefully if they do end up hiring him, I hope I'm wrong on that. I think that if we're being honest, you know, the Knicks, they might want to go a little younger. They might want to go with some fresh blood. I wouldn't be upset with a first-time NBA head coach. I wouldn't be upset with a first-time NBA head coach. I would not be upset by it, assuming they were on a coaching staff beforehand, and you know, like under the right circumstances, of course. I think the thing that I would be upset by is I would be kind of upset with Mike Malone. I won't lie. I'd be kind of upset with it. I hope whoever they hire is successful. I'm not going to judge whoever they hire until they play, right? You know, and that thing happens. Like, it's going to be really hard for you and I to really understand how good of a coach somebody is until we see how things work out. You could argue, you know, when the Knicks hired Tibbs, I don't think the ideal was that team would get to the Eastern Conference Finals in 5 years. I don't think that was the vision, but they got there. So, you know, I'm going to put a lot of trust into this front office. There are a lot of things they could sell me on. I would love for it to not be Malone. I'd love to not have to try to get sold on Mike Malone. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, I mean, I'm with you on that. I mean, I wouldn't like hate Michael Malone, but I feel like that would be settling at the same time because it's like the known name that's available. I do think he's a solid coach, but I do think what you said, there were problems with him. You know, he didn't play his veterans nearly enough on the Nuggets, and I had seen reports too. They said, like, you know, even the front office guys wanted him to play the younger guys more, and and Malone insisted otherwise. So I mean, you know, you'll run into a lot of problems too with him. But I feel like no head coach is perfect. I think that's something I should point out. There is no perfect head coach in this world anymore. It just doesn't happen, right? We haven't seen a repeat champion in so long, so there is no perfect head coach these days, right? So with all that being said, I mean, you know, whatever the Knicks end up doing, I trust them to make the right decision because, you know, the Knicks have typically pressed the right buttons over the past few years. Obviously, a lot of those moves have been involving players, but now you're involving your coaching staff. And I think they have made the right moves assistant coach wise. You know, I think they have good assistant coaches. I think they've pressed the right buttons. Obviously, there's a few mistakes, and I think we can all agree, like the Mikal Bridges trade for 5 first-round picks is one of those mistakes. But at the same time, it's not necessarily because of the player; it's because of the return you gave. But at the same time, like I'm saying, they usually do make the right decision. I'm confident the Knicks will do that. I don't know if Michael Malone is the answer. I don't know if he is the answer at all. I feel like maybe they need a younger voice. Personally, I think a younger voice would be better for this group because it is a relatively young group. I mean, they're not like, you know, they're not Oklahoma City Thunder young, but they're a little young. They don't have like that many like, you know, older veterans on their team. That's why they signed PJ Tucker, but they didn't sign PJ Tucker to become the head coach. So you got to get a good voice in there. I feel like a younger voice that can kind of resonate with the guys a little more would help this team a lot more. And I feel like the offense would just flow a lot better if you get a younger voice in there, a guy who kind of understands the modern NBA a little bit better than Tom Thibodeau did because, you know, Tom Thibodeau obviously made it far this year, and he had playoff appearances in despite of this modern NBA stuff. But I think we can agree his schemes and game plans were very old school. That's just who he is. That's how he was. He always coaches the same way. It always ends up fizzling out like this. But I think we can agree that, you know, he put a stamp in New York. He made them relevant again. No matter what happens moving forward, people will remember Tom Thibodeau as a good Knicks head coach, despite, you know, the way that we came up short and the time. It was time now to move on from him, and he couldn't like stay here for like a decade. It was time to move on, but he did his part, and I think Thibodeau deserves credit for that. He did his part. He set the culture. He established a winning environment. Now it's time to take the next step, and I think if they hire a younger voice, they can do that next step a lot quicker. Michael Malone on the one hand wouldn't be the worst thing, but I don't think he's like the answer. So,
yeah, and I got to pull up this report real quick from CP, the franchise. Apparently, a common theme of players was not knowing their roles, and that's what led to Tibbs getting fired. Players didn't really know their role. They didn't really feel like their roles on the team were defined. If you remember, I don't know if you know this Jeff T podcast clip where he talks about like Tibbs doesn't really like tell you what he doesn't really coach you. You know, not saying that he's, again, a bad coach, but that would kind of fall in line with that. This notion that, like, there's not enough communication with players and the head coach. And that if you look at the head coach again, you look at what really good head coaches do, they have these not elaborate per se, but these well thought out, well planned schemes. If you look at the Indiana Pacers, I imagine they have skills and sets and schemes that they run. They know their roles. They know what they're doing in late game scenarios. You know, we talk about like the cat with the drop coverage and not knowing his defensive assignments. You know, maybe that reflects more on coaching than it does on the player, right? Maybe that has a little bit more to do with coaching than the player. And, you know, the final thing I'd like to mention too, you know, because I know I've been kind of going off for a little bit about Tibbs, and, you know, there's only so much that can be said, and we're going to record to further elaborate on this and what this means for the Knicks offseason. The New York Knicks cannot have that kind of communication breakdown to win a title. You just can't. You can't have player-only meetings called consistently throughout the postseason. You can't have players not knowing their roles. You can't have unoptimized or inefficient rotations and win a championship. You can't do it. And if you can't win a championship with those things, and those are the things that are consistent with your head coach, the head coach has to go. You cannot justify having someone who you do not believe you can win a title with as your head coach in a contention window. That's the reality of it. I know people are saying, well,
I'm seeing people go like, oh, Leon Rose, he's just a scapegoat. He's got to take accountability, this and that. Leon Rose did not build a perfect roster. It's impossible to build a perfect roster. Closest thing to a perfect roster I've seen, Celtics last year, Thunder this year. I'd say the Thunder this year a little more than the Celtics last year. Golden State Warriors, they had, KD. 96 Bulls, right? Those are close to perfect rosters. Not perfect even. Close to perfect rosters. This team got to the Eastern Conference Finals in their first year together. I'll consider that a pretty decent offseason. I'll consider that a pretty decent job in terms of roster construction, right? Not saying Leon Rose is the greatest thing since sliced bread, but I think that he has proven to be a pretty good, decision maker at the NBA level. I think the bigger problem is clearly the head coach, and I hope that fans see it that way. And I think if you don't see it that way, you didn't watch the playoffs. That's my opinion. I'm not saying that I'm 100% correct, and we'll see if as time passes, if I'm on the right side of history or not. I think I'll be on the right side of history on this. I think I'm going to be on the right side of history on this one. I think I will.
Yeah, and I mean, I want to get back to that communication thing you brought up with the players not knowing their role, because that is something I noticed even in real time. Like I said, plays weren't being drawn up for Towns that often for threes. Mikal Bridges was sitting in the corner more often than not. Josh Hart was never shooting the ball. Obviously, some of those guys, you can look at the players and say, well, they're not asserting themselves enough. But on the other side, you can look at it and say, well, Tibbs is not making sure that they're getting involved scheme-wise. You know what I mean? And look at the beginning of the season when Josh Hart publicly said he didn't know what his role was. Obviously, he could have easily just been being Josh Hart and could have just been his little trolling self, or he could have been dead serious. And I think he was a little serious about that at the time because he scored 2 points in the preseason in total. He didn't really take any shots or anything like that. And obviously, preseason is a whole different than the regular season because then he started scoring in the regular season. But even during the playoffs, we saw him go back to the habits of just not putting the ball in the basket. You know what I mean? I feel like there was too much not knowing what was going on. And the miscommunication on defense is the biggest thing. Those guys were never in sync on defense throughout the postseason. It felt very rare that they actually were communicating and understanding where their rotations and assignments were. I blame the coach for that. I do. I understand the Knicks don't have overall amazing defensive talent when you look at their whole entire roster because Brunson and Towns are pretty bad defenders. But when something simple as rotating and just covering your assignment, that's a coaching thing and an IQ thing. It's a mix of both. The player deserves some blame for that, but I blame the coach in part too because of the schemes he was running. Tom Thibodeau was always doing the drop coverage. He always was never putting pressure on ball handlers. He was always leaving shooters open for threes. That was his game plan. He wanted teams to beat you by the three because he thinks that taking a three is a more difficult shot. And in theory, it is. But in today's NBA, everybody can shoot. And the three-pointer can kill you as much as anything else. And if game one did not prove that, when we blew a 15-point lead in 2.5 minutes strictly on three-pointers, I don't know what to tell you. I don't know what to say because things like that are coachable. And when you're not making sure that your guys are, communicating or in sync or understanding each other's roles, that's a coaching thing because it is the coach's responsibility to make sure that those guys are on the same page. And when they aren't, it's pretty easy who to point the finger to. It's that simple.
Yeah, and, I'm not sure I have anything else to add at this point in time. Again, it's just this is what I think had to happen. I think it had to happen, and that's where I'm at with this situation. And that's where I'm going to continue to be at until something changes. Until I see, the Knicks struggle and make embarrassing decisions with the rotations with a new head coach. Then I'll revisit this and change my opinion. But until then, I saw what I saw. I know what I know, and I think the organization, their decision reflects that I think I saw what I wanted to. I think my eyes weren't lying to me, and I don't think the numbers are lying to me either. So
yeah,
Dylan, you have anything else you want to add?
No, I don't have much else to add other than it's that simple as you said. We had been saying now for quite some time that a change was needed at the head coaching spot, and we had been giving our reasons why because we would see it with our own two eyes and we watched what was going wrong. And as you said, I mean, clearly those eyes were not lying because the front office saw the exact same thing and said, okay, well, it's time to move on. And you know what? Credit to them again, because I really didn't think they were going to do it as much as we had vouched for it. I didn't actually think it was going to happen. And if it was going to happen, I didn't think it would happen this quickly, 2 days after getting eliminated. That tells me that they had this set in stone already if they weren't going to advance. So, you know, whatever happens moving forward. We still have a very long offseason ahead of us, so we have no clue when or who the next head coach will be. But whenever that time comes, we'll, of course, make sure we're covering that on here. But, until then, we're going to speculate and wonder who's the next guy going to be. But we can also reflect on Tibbs a little bit for this time right now because, like I said before, Tibbs did do a lot for this Knicks team. This organization had very little going on for them before he came along. He obviously set the culture. He brought them back to winning games again. He deserves a lot of credit for what he did here. And he did his part. And he did his part well. But it ran its course. It was time to move on. As much as we could have wanted him, some of you guys could have wanted him to stay and really kind of see if he could figure it out with a second year of this roster. We got to go all in and try to win a championship right now. And a difficult decision like this just had to happen. Sometimes you have to make a very, very, very tough decision to get yourself to the next step. And, it also impacts how you go after free agents, what players you trade for, because they take into account who the head coach is and how that head coaching style is. And who knows? We've all seen the polls before. Nobody wants to play for Tibbs. I know a lot of the players who played for him always debunk all the rumors about him. But even so, the common perception is that players don't want to play for Tibbs because they just know how he is. They know his coaching style. They know the heavy minutes. They know the practices or lack thereof. And that's that. So maybe this head coaching change will give them some more leverage in free agency. It'll help them set up some more trades that can help them win more games and build a better basketball team to win a championship next year or beyond that. So we'll see what happens. We obviously can't predict the future, but all in all, the move that happened today, it had to be done. It was stunning. The timing was stunning, but it was the right decision.
Yeah, I agree. I do want to throw in one thing. Ian Begley threw cold water on the idea of Jay Wright or Mike Malone as the next NBA coach, but he did give a little bit of credence to the idea that Johnny Bryant could be a candidate. So Mike Malone, I think we can rule that one out. Ian Begley's as plugged in as it gets. I know CP, the franchise, also mentioned that they don't really want Michael Malone, so I think that's dead in the water. Until I see something different that's dead in the water, I also don't see Jay Wright coming out of retirement to do this. So that'd be a little weird to hire someone just because they were Jalen Brunson's college coach. That wouldn't really go well. I think that'd be a really tough sell for me. It doesn't really reflect what Leon Rose seems to be trying to do. So, yeah, we'll see where things go here. Right now, if I had to guess, I think Johnny Bryant's he's a betting odd favorite as well, but I think we need way more time to figure out, or we'll need more reports to follow to see where things go from there. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you guys checking out Fireside Knicks and sticking in for the live stream. If you're rewatching this after the live stream, we still appreciate you for stopping by. We'll see you guys in the next one. Make sure to check out all of our social media platforms, Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, EmpireSportsMedia.com. We got ring coverage there. Dylan did the article on the Tibbs firing. So, yeah, tons of fun stuff going on. We're going to record again and talk about more with this new development and with what could be a very, very seismic offseason for the New York Knicks, even if it doesn't result in, a big superstar trade. So, thank you again so much for tuning in, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Let's go Knicks. Peace out.